Hi, and welcome to the Fire Mountain Gems and Beads Jewelry Making Studio. I'm Lisa Pavelka, and today I'm so excited to discuss a few exciting products that I love working with and show you how you can use them to make faux dichroic jewelry components. So let's start with the first product, and that is the Apoxie Sculpt 2-part clay. This is actually glue. And the exciting thing about the Apoxie Sculpt is it comes in different colors and different sizes. So when you start working with it, here I've got the 1/10 of a pound size. I think you're going to find you're going to want to go ahead and get it in larger quantities. You can get the black and the super white in a 4-ounce size. And that's a nice economy size that will give you lots and lots of possibilities to make many, many projects. Today we're working with the black. And being a 2-part epoxy compound means we have to measure 2 equal pieces. Now, if you're good with spatial relationships, you could probably just eyeball it by rolling it into balls. If you're not so sure that you're going to get even parts, you want a 50-50 ratio, you could go ahead and place it on a jeweler's scale. Be sure to put something down like this Teflon Teflex paper. It's the same product we work with when we're working with metal clays. That will keep it from sticking to the surface. So I'm going to go ahead and put on some disposable gloves, which I recommend. Some people actually will mix it without the gloves, but if you're sensitive to glues, or this can also help prevent you becoming sensitized to epoxy glues, I really think it's a good idea to mix the parts together with gloves on. I actually like to handle it once it's formed with my hands alone, and then I clean it up well with just some alcohol swabs. So I'm taking the 2 parts and we're just going to knead them together by hand. Now don't worry that your hands and the glue is going to get all over these gloves, because you're just going to dispose of them when you're finished. And you want to mix it until it's one color. You don't want to see any of that second part, the gray part, showing. And I would say once it looks like it's one color, you really would like to mix it for another minute just to make sure you've thoroughly blended both components. And you've got about 2 to 3 hours of working time with the product. And it's self-hardening. It doesn't need to be baked. It's going to air dry, and it dries rock hard. It's very, very strong. In fact, I even like to use it for household repairs. You can use it with paints and dyes and inks, but you can get the Apoxie Sculpt through Fire Mountain Gems and Beads in a variety pack of lots of colors. Okay, I think that's good there. Well, now I want to flatten it for this project that we're going to do. So it's probably a little bit better just to get that process started by putting it in your hand and flattening out just a little bit with your gloves still on. And then we're going to roll it out. So I've taken, these are the same slats that you'll find with the metal clay supplies, and I've taken these slats and I've chosen the red slats to use to measure an equal thickness when I roll this out. That's about 1.5 millimeters thick. So I'm going to go ahead and remove my gloves, and I'm going to take an acrylic roller. And this little product I put in a little spray bottle here is something you can get at any automotive supply store, or even your drugstore usually carries it. It's a silicone spray that's used to make your tires shiny, or to condition the vinyl or leather in your car. It's often sold under the name STP Son of a Gun or Armor All, and you can also find generic versions of it. But the silicone spray is going to help prevent our piece from sticking to another piece of Teflex, which I'm going to lay over the top. It's a non-stick surface, but this epoxy glue is so sticky, without the spray, it's really going to stick. So we want a nice smooth surface for our next step. So we're just going to roll it back and forth until it's as flat as it's going to be. Those slats will make sure we have a nice even thickness, and we can remove the top part of the Teflex, and now we're finished with our slats. And I'm just going to blot that. You can actually blot it with a paper towel if you have one at home, but I'm just going to get that extra silicone off. It's not going to hurt or affect the finish of this, but we want to bring the surface back to a more of a sticky, tacky finish. So I see that's all evaporated. Now what I'm going to work with is my mylar-backed foils that I developed for polymer clay, epoxy resin, two-part adhesives and tapes. There's really unlimited potential with what you can do with this product. But today we're working with one of my foil collections. This is the Expression set. And in each package, you get 6 different colors and patterns. So this particular one comes with copper, silver, gold, oil slick. This is like what you see when you see oil on the surface of water, but it's got a silver opaque backing. Then we've got speckle, and one of my favorites looks like an oil slick, but I call it pearlescent. It's a translucent foil you can see right through. You can stamp underneath it or put other effects with it. And you'll see some tutorials here at the Fire Mountain Gems and Beads Studio that I'm going to be working with later on image transfers. So be sure to check that out. But in the meantime, we're going to set this aside, and we're going to start with the copper. Now, the instructions and tips are also included in the packaging, but it will tell you that the color of the foil always goes face up. So I'm going to lay it down, and being that this is nice and flat, it should receive it well. Now, if this had been polymer clay, I would be burnishing for about 30 to 60 seconds. But because the glue is sticky, I only need to burnish for about 5 to 10 seconds. What I'm taking here is just a piece of scrap paper. Anything that will cut the drag between your fingers and the surface of the foil. What makes the foil stick to any type of clay substrate is heat, not so much pressure. But by using the flat pads of my fingers, keeping them nice and flat, and using a piece of scrap paper as a barrier to cut any drag from body oils, lotions, the clay residue that might be adhering to your fingers, that allows me to use firm pressure to generate more heat and friction. So I've actually burnished it probably longer than I need. Now, we're going to rip this off as fast as we can. And you don't want to pull up. You want to pull parallel to your work surface. So I'll just hold the Teflex secure underneath and pay attention to the side you're ripping the foil from. It's a very important tip that might come in handy in just a second. Okay, almost perfect. So I'm going to angle that a little bit so you can see that lovely copper color. Now, it's not unusual with my foils that you might see a few speckles that don't release from the mylar backing. Sometimes that's because maybe your clay isn't completely flat, so the foil isn't really making good contact with the surface. But I know my clay was smooth and flat, nice and even, so that just happens anyway, even with a perfect piece of clay. It's a very easy thing to fix. We're just going to lay the foil right back down, almost like you're putting a puzzle piece back together, and you're going to reburnish. Now, I'm not sure I laid it back in place exactly, but that's okay. It's just to give you the idea of how to fix it. Now, the trick is to reburnish and to rip it from a different direction. It doesn't have to be the opposite direction, just different, and as fast as we can. So there, it actually really laid down where I had it aligned well. It laid all those pieces back in place. Now, a little tip with the foils. A lot of people will get them and they'll cut just a small bit off because they think that's all I'm using for that project. Don't cut the sheets, leave them completely intact. You'll find that they're easier to handle and work with, and I don't throw away the sheet until all I have left is nothing but clear mylar. There's literally dozens and dozens of things you can do, even with those cool little scrappy bits. And those are tips and tutorials we'll be bringing here to the Fire Mountain Gems and Beads Studio in the future. So we'll set that aside, and I'm taking the large rose leaf cutter. I have embossing cutters that come in different sizes and shapes, ivy leaves, holly leaves, and hopefully we'll see some more different designs down the road. But I'm taking the large rose leaf cutter. This is wonderful also for use with polymer clay, metal clay, and if you're a foodie, you might want to get a second set because they're food grade quality. So you can use them with fondant and marzipan, but you wouldn't use the same set you use on clay that you use on food. So I'm just going to set it down, and you want to use a surface that you can check to make sure you're covering all your foil clay, like I've got here. And I'm just going to push down around the outside edge. That's going to work like a cookie cutter. Then I'm going to push the plunger down, and I'm actually going to put pressure all the way around the outside edge of the plunger just to make sure I got a good embossed effect. Now, if the clay sticks inside your cutter, just push the plunger down and very gently peel it off. The foil acts as a release agent at this point. So now what I'm going to do is see if I can peel off the excess clay away, and sometimes it comes off cleanly, sometimes it doesn't. That's okay that it didn't. I'll show you what you can do next. You'll take a nice sharp clay blade and very carefully, holding it at an angle, you're going to just shimmy it as I'm doing here. I'll try to do it towards the camera. And you're going to shimmy back and forth. This is going to help keep from stretching or cutting through the clay if it's at an angle. And just loosen it from the surface. So I'm going to get that excess clay away. And don't worry, this extra clay I'm going to be able to use. There's no waste with the Apoxie Sculpt. So we're just lifting it up. And it's okay to take your time. And we'll put the scraps aside. I could just reblend these together and make all that foil disappear and go back to black clay that I can use for another project. But we'll set that aside for now. And we've got our leaf. And now I'm going to take a piece of packing tape. And you can use any adhesive tape will work. But I like packing tape because it's nice and wide. And I'm going to lay it down over the top of this textured leaf and very lightly, I'm hardly putting any pressure down at all with my finger, burnishing the surface. And I will peel the tape away, and sometimes it comes off right off the leaf and sometimes the leaf sticks. And voila. This is a technique my friends named the Pavelka peel, and it leaves all the vein lines in relief inside and exposing the black clay on top. So let's say if I was working with white or pink epoxy clay, that's the underlying color you'd see. Now, I know a lot of you are probably thrifty and maybe you do some card making or scrapbooking. I wouldn't throw this piece away. One of my favorite tips to do with that is to put it on a white blank address mailing label, cut out around it, and you've got a beautiful sticker or closure for a greeting card. So there's really no waste in anything we're doing. Well, now we revealed the black clay underneath, but I think I'm going to make it a little extra special, and this is what's going to give it that dichroic quality. I'm taking a piece of the pearlescent foil. Now, if you remember earlier I said that you want the foil color facing up as you apply it to the clay. But as you can see here, you can see foil color on both sides. So in the package, it will indicate when there's pearlescent in your collection, the shiny side is the side that goes face up. So we will lay this down, and we're going to take our burnishing paper again. And really anything like newspaper, just any scrap paper you have lying around will work. And I'm pressing pretty firmly here because I want to cover all those exposed areas with that lovely dichroic effect. And you might have noticed that my leaf looks like I ruined it. It's all spread out and flattened. Well, that's exactly what happened. But the vein line stayed intact. That pattern is still very discernible. We're going to rip it off. And I'm going to angle this a little bit because it might be hard to see from one angle. You can see that it's got that lovely iridescent dichroic effect. When you use pearlescent on black clay, you get an abalone shell type of look. When you use it on white clays, it looks like mother of pearl. And then we're going to show you something else you can do with it. You can leave it flat like this, and that's pretty. Or sometimes you can add a little bit more interest to your piece by texturing it. What I've taken here is just a small piece of very coarse sandpaper, and watch the tonality, how it changes the foil when I just do one side of it, how it makes the color of the pearlescent foil pop. But yet I can still see the vein lines underneath. So I'm actually going to go back and just texture the rest of this. And now I'm going to take my leaf cutter back once again, and I'm going to align it down. So I just want to make sure I'm going to peek and make sure I'm covering all the clay. All right? We're going to cut down, but this time I'm not going to push the plunger down to try to get the embossed vein lines. Chances are they're not going to line up with the vein lines that are in the foil. If you want to try it, I don't want to discourage you from doing it, but I'm just going to get a nice clean look by cutting out the outline again. Now, at this point, you can just leave it sit and dry. It's going to be hard in 2 to 3 hours, and it will reach optimal strength within 24. And it's going to be very, very hard and durable. Or you can slide your blade underneath it to remove the excess clay. I usually just let it sit and dry right on my nonstick surface, and then the two come apart cleanly. If you have any rough edges, just take a metal file or a nail file to it and clean it up and let it dry. So let me talk to you about a few finished pieces. And actually one right here that I prepared just a little bit ago. that still isn't quite dry, we're going to loosen it from the surface with our clay blade, and it'll get stiffer as it starts to cure. But one of the things I like to do is sometimes I'll do pieces where I shape my leaves and make them look like leaves that have dried in the autumn, especially if you use the autumnal colors like the gold and the copper. And you could do a whole bunch of these and string them from a chain and make a really beautiful statement with them. Or I can stretch them out, elongate them, and give them a totally different shape and appearance. And lastly, I can use my Magic Gloss UV resin. It cures in 5 to 10 minutes in sunlight or under a long wave UV lamp. And as you can see, there's no bezel setting holding that in. If you'd like to learn more about how to work with the resin, be sure to look for my video here at the Fire Mountain Gems and Beads Jewelry Studio on how to work with UV resins to get this glass-like effect. But once this is dried, it's very easy to drill it, carve it, you can backfill it. You don't need a high-powered tool to drill through it. I oftentimes just use my drill. And here's just one more little bit of inspiration where I've done a similar leaf. I used the gold instead of the copper for the vein lines. I didn't do the underlying texture. I added the Magic Gloss, and about an hour after it cured, I drilled holes to add my lovely Swarovski element pendant and a jump ring to hang it by, and then I drilled into the resin to add a chaton crystal. So hopefully you get an idea that this is just the tip of the creative iceberg, and there's lots of possibilities with Apoxie Sculpt, foils, and cutting and molding tools. So I'd like to thank you so much for joining me here today in Fire Mountain Gems and Beads Jewelry Making Studio. For more tips, techniques, and tutorials, be sure to visit us at firemountaingems.com.